All right. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on which side of this great continent you are on. We are ready to start day number 2 for the Expand Your Brand Workshop. Really excited today. Yesterday, we covered a whole lot of stuff from how to dissect the top 5 people in your space to figure out what they're doing, how to distribute that content, how to differentiate yourself as you're building out your thought leadership platforms. And today, we're really going deep into how actually I built a podcast, how I landed the TV show, and how actually I came up with this multifamily conference idea and executed on it. So looking forward to sharing a lot of personal stories and experiences with you, a whole bunch of learning, a whole bunch of mistakes that I made along the way. And as you can see, we've got the whiteboard behind me. So we'll be drawing things out and really learning that way. So really looking forward to an interactive experience today. Hopefully you are coming with a whole bunch of questions because we'll be going deep into a whole bunch of different stuff. So quick recap from yesterday. You'll remember that the 3 Ds that we have, I kind of mentioned, we have to dissect. So what we did was we discovered the top 5 thought leaders in our space. We looked at what they were doing. We figured out all the similarities between them because that common connecting thread. Then we figured out what makes that person unique, analyzed why we were attracted to that person, what we liked about them, what they were doing. Then we looked at how we can differentiate ourselves. So we looked at the blue ocean versus the red ocean. So the red ocean, you have all the sharks fighting. The ocean is filled with blood, lots of competition, and you become commoditized in that type of environment. Blue ocean, we figure out your unique angle on your spin, your unique experiences, and the angle that's being missed by the top 5 people in the space. So that's the gap in the market. And then that's what creates your sub niche or the blue ocean, whichever way you want to term it. And then we figure out distribution. Now, the big lesson with distribution is you have to be proficient and prolific. So with prolific, I use Alexandre Dumas as an example, where he basically produced a literary factory that churned out novel after novel after novel, even though they were serialized back then. And basically, because if you publish 100 pieces of content, you might have 1 or 2 that become the greatest hit. And that's what it takes. So you basically get your quality from the quantity of your output. And I think the big lesson I learned too with running my podcast was if somebody's running a podcast every single month or once a month, that's 12. Once a week, you got 52 in the year. But if you go every day, you get 365. So you basically have 8 years of experience, give or take, versus somebody running once a month, which isn't very good. So anyways, let's dive into today. So today we're going to be covering the podcast. So if you're looking at running a podcast, that's what we'll be covering. And then I'll be walking you through how I landed the TV show, everything behind the scenes on the TV show, and then also the conference, breaking down the angle I took, how I assembled it, and why we've been able to scale to the largest real estate investing conference in the country when you have hundreds of other events that are kind of stuck in that smaller scale. So let's get right into it with the podcast. So when you're running a podcast, right, it's not too complicated. And this is why a podcast is a great thought leadership platform to start with. So let's say podcast. And this is kind of weird. Usually I'm standing up doing these videos. It's kind of weird sitting down and doing the whiteboard. So with a podcast is your lowest barrier to entry, which is good and bad, right? So we have to frame it this way. It's good because you don't need a whole lot of equipment. You just need a microphone, and you don't even need a microphone because your computer has one. So bare bones, you need a computer and usually an internet connection because you're doing Zoom or Google Meet, Skype, whatever it is, in terms of talking with people. So you just need a computer, low barrier to entry. But it also means that everybody else is equally able to do a podcast because it's pretty easy to do. So let's do some pros and cons here, and then we'll break it down further. So pros, barrier to entry is low. Now the con is competition. Everybody and their uncle has a podcast. It's one of those things. It's kind of like when you're on LinkedIn, everybody calls themselves a speaker, author, and investor. It's the same thing with the podcast. Everybody calls themselves a podcast host. So the pro thing, but you know what? A podcast is great. It's where I started, and I wouldn't be doing the cool stuff I'm doing today if I didn't start running the podcast. So low barrier to entry. It's really accessible. It's inexpensive. You don't need a whole lot of money to start up. But if you remember from yesterday, I literally lost everything and I was at zero, probably negative dollars at that point in terms of starting the podcast because all my assets blew up. So with a podcast, you just need a computer, you need an internet connection. That's all it takes. You can even way back in the day, there were a couple guys who were doing podcast recordings on their phone. So they would call somebody, record the phone conversation on like the hardline phone, and then they will upload that file as a podcast. So if you want to go way bare bones, like that's one way to do it. So barrier to entry is low, cost is low to run a podcast, and the editing, you don't really have to do any editing. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, how to edit a podcast, but the editing is pretty low. The con, it's really a competition, and it's hard to differentiate yourself. So kind of like red ocean, blue ocean, how we were talking about that in terms of thought leadership in general, because you have so many people who start a podcast and it's so accessible, you have to really differentiate yourself. So what most people do, and this is kind of what I did to start off, you're like, hey, I want to run a podcast. I'm going to run a podcast about real estate investing, about healthcare, about legal, about accounting, whatever your industry or niche is. So you've got everybody running like that surface level thing. Now, remember the exercise we did yesterday, figuring out your unique angle on things, your experience, whether we had some examples with police officers, we had examples like with a whole, like running events before, all sorts of stuff. This is how you have to tackle your podcast, right? So you have to have your angle here, so that this is you. And then you also need to have your gap in the market. So, and this is going to create your sub niche. This is the trick with podcasts, right? Because there are a million one, just using real estate as an example, everybody has a real estate investing podcast. It is insane. There are thousands and thousands out there, but why are the top 10 so much farther ahead? Well, number one, some podcasts just started at the right time. That's the way it is. It's kind of like people who blew up in Instagram back in the day or on YouTube. They were just in the right place at the right time and they got pushed. I'm actually friends with the guy who started his podcast at the right time, and it just exploded. He had the quantity that he was producing. He did a good job with it. Like not the best job, but not the worst job, but everything pushed because he was one of the first guys out of the gate. But now that podcasting is a little bit more mature, we really have to think about how we're going to position ourselves. So what I did back in the day when I started my podcast, I mentioned this yesterday, I came up with a really bad name. I called it Purchase to Profits. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this is a brutal name. Number one, you have no idea what that means. I thought I was being clever with alliteration, having some keywords in there. You have to purchase a property, then you profit. So I take you from when you purchase to when you profit. That was silly because when you look at it, you have no idea what it is about. So now when I'm naming things, whether it's products or events or thought leadership platforms, I'm trying to be very literal with the naming. Number one, because Google understands what it is and everybody's going to be searching for it. Like you search the multifamily conference, like it pops up because it's very literal to what it is. Google understands what you're searching for. On the flip side, Purchase to Profits, brutal name. It was absolutely horrible. So I would not suggest you do that. But the thing is, even with a bad name, I still produced a podcast and did hundreds and hundreds of episodes, and I got results from it. So don't let the name hold you back. Think about the name for a little bit, but it's not the end all and be all. Same with a logo. Like you don't really need a podcast logo to get started. It just start and figure that stuff out. Later on down the road. So we got a whole lot of pros to starting a podcast, which is why I strongly suggest you launch a podcast if you're brand new to thought leadership, because this is going to be where you learn. Now, the great thing with the podcast is you don't have to be on camera. So you can have notes, you can have cheat sheets. Nobody knows if you're reading them because it's audio only. Now, the trend now is to actually have video. So you'll record the podcast, you'll have the video recording, you can splice that for Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, YouTube, and then you can upload the audio only version. That works just fine. But if you're just starting out, who cares? Because I'll tell you what, like your first 10, 20 episodes, nobody's going to listen. So it's just practice. So it doesn't matter. Get yourself comfortable and then rock and roll with it. So that's just a little introduction to the podcast. Now, one of the things you need for a podcast is you need to figure out what you're actually going to be doing, because what style of podcast do you want to run? And there's a couple of ways you can do this. And this is something I thought about when I first started. You can run a solo podcast. So you've got solo over here, and then you've got your interview format over here. And then there's a couple different ways you can run it, but we'll just keep it simple for today. So if you're solo, if you're already, I would say if you're more established as a business person, whatever in your industry, and you have some really good nuggets you want to share, and you're really passionate about it, and you have a good track record, you have the credibility already in the space, and you just want another platform to get your message out, especially when people are driving in the car, they're working out in the gym, that kind of thing. The solo podcast is probably what you want to do. Because it's just you control the thought process, but the con is you have to come up with a whole lot of content, because if you're doing a daily podcast, weekly podcast, whichever cadence you decide, you have to figure out the content game. And trust me, content, it's a full-time sport. We're bringing on a full-time guy whose only job it is to think of content ideas and execute on those. So it is a full-time sport for content. But if you have the content, you have the credibility, this is a great way to do it. Though, on the flip side, with the interview, and this is the way I chose when I first started. The reason is I was making the transition from single-family home investing into the multifamily space. I did not yet have the credibility. I did not yet have the track record. So, it made a whole lot of sense to bring on people with the track record who had the credibility to give me some guests that people might actually want to listen to. And then I could interview them, dig a little bit deeper. I would do some learning on my own. They would provide the gravitas to the episode, and it's a win-win situation. They get some promo. I get some credibility just for talking with them. That worked really well for the interview. Now, at some point, you will want to transition from doing the interview format to the solo if you're thinking from a business point of view. So let's break it down this way. Joe Rogan, he still does interviews. That's awesome. That's what he wants to do. He's not positioning this from a business point of view. He's an entertainment podcast. So it's a little bit different than having a podcast for business purposes. Because with Joe Rogan, he's not selling you a product. He makes money on signing Spotify deals. That's how he's making money. He's curated the audience. He entertains the audience. And now he's monetizing that audience through the sale of the rights of his podcast. From a business perspective, let's say you're running a business with real estate, or if you're running events, whatever it is, you have to think about lead generation and think about things differently, which is where the interview podcast, it kind of gets old after a while. Because think of it this way, and this is what I realized. You're running the interview podcast. You're building an audience. Everybody's tuning in. But if you're, let's say, in the real estate space, and you bring on other real estate investors that are directly competing with you, you're basically promoting your competition. And generally speaking, the guests, you're going to pump them up. You're going to make them seem really good. If you are offering a similar product, at some point, it's going to make sense to cut that mode of doing it and then switch to a solo podcast, right? So with us, you'll notice with our content, way back in the day, I used to run the interview podcast. When I stopped the podcast, we did the TV show. We had the guests come in. But now with YouTube and all the stuff we're doing, it's transitioned more to a solo, because now we have the track record, we have the credibility, we have more of an audience. And now it makes more sense to have my ideas, my thoughts, my opinions front and center, rather than a guest who's coming on. So this is just some advice and feedback from my own personal experience. If you're just getting started in a space and you want to reach out and build your network and all of that kind of stuff, do the interview format. Now, the big thing, you get episodes out of it. Yes, you get people, tuning in, listening to you. But the big benefit that you're going to get from doing the interview format is the Rolodex. That's all that matters. It's the connections, because now you have everybody's phone number, you have everybody's direct email address. If you need something, you can email them directly. And there's no way you would have gotten that information or their contact info unless you invited them on your podcast episode. So if it were me starting out, interview format, build out the Rolodex, build out the connections, and then transition at some point to a solo podcast. And then this is where your own content. So you have your own opinions, your own ideas, your own beliefs, your own stories. And now this is what you build your content around. Okay. So that's with the podcast, figuring out, what type of podcast you're going to do, but both ways work just fine. A good example of a solo podcast is Russell Brunson, the guy who, one of the guys who founded ClickFunnels. He started a podcast in his car in the morning, and it was just him talking about his journey, what they were doing to grow, and it was his own content. He didn't do the interview format. Okay, so that's figuring out which way, like what part of what style of podcast you want to run. Now let's talk about how you're going to frame the podcast and your angle. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. And there's pros and cons to both, as with everything. So one way of running a podcast is very, very structured. So it's kind of like a TV show. Back in the day, you have the one and dones. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So, back in the day, you have Patrick Stewart, Next Generation Star Trek. Every episode was encapsulated in itself, right? You had the teaser, they cut to commercials, you have your 3 acts, and then you're done. And that formula repeated every episode, like time and time again. You knew exactly what was going to happen. It was always the same format, and except when you had a 2-parter. But it was always the same format. That's a great way to run a podcast, because the audience knows exactly what to do. You know exactly what to do, but it gets old kind of fast. So what I found is I would always ask the same kind of questions. I would start off my podcast by asking the guest, what their goals are, where they're looking to go in real estate, that kind of thing. Then we would transition into talking about a deal that made a big impact on them and their business. Why was it a great deal? How did they find the deal? Why was it a great deal? What were the results of the deal? Blah, 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 blah. And then I would transition into closing. So we were running 20 to 30-minute episodes. And then at the end of the episode, I'd be like, okay, great. Well, what's the one thing you have to change about how you think about real estate to get to the next level? That kind of thing. So the answers were really interesting, because when I had an interesting guest on, it was interesting to hear what the person had to say, but it was pretty cookie cutter. And after 400 and something episodes, I was done with the format. It wasn't appealing. I burned out, because it wasn't something that still resonated with me. So if you're thinking about starting out, it's easy to have a structure, because it gives you rules to play in, and it gives you some sort of form to use if you're just starting out. But at some point, you're going to want to switch into tailoring the podcast to a guest if you're still running the interview format. Okay, so you've got the tailored approach. So we'll call it the structure, right? This is great to start off. But if you're still running the interview format over on this side, and you're starting to get good guests, like interesting guests that people actually want to listen to, you want to tailor. I used Brian Rose with London Real as an example back in the day when he started out, or in his first couple of years when he started landing the really big guests. He researched every single guest, and he had built out his whole questions. Now, sometimes he went off on tangents with them. That was really natural and organic, which is great. But he kind of knew, roughly speaking, what he wanted to talk about based on that guest. So he would read their books and come out with questions. That is, in my opinion, the very best way to go if you're running an interview format. But you need quality guests who have the content that you can read up on, who can attract the eyeballs, that kind of thing. Okay, so run the structured format. Yeah, that's great to start off, but then you really want to have a tailored approach once you get a little bit more established with your podcast. Now, if you're running a solo podcast, so that's for interview. For solo, it runs a little bit differently. Yeah, you can, like, if you're talking about your own ideas, yeah, you can have a structure, just like with a YouTube video, right? With YouTube, you have your hook, and then you have the reason why you want to keep watching, and then you have the organic, the teaching moments in there, whatever it is, and then you have your call to action at the end. You have the rough format, but if it's you with your own ideas, you can mix it up a little bit better because you're just talking about your own stories, your own experiences. Maybe one day you'll have a longer episode, another day you'll have a shorter episode. It really doesn't matter at that point when you're first starting out. Now, let's switch over to analytics and things that I've learned from running a podcast, and then we'll talk about editing, okay? And then if you have any questions, just put it in the chat. This is going in a whole bunch of different areas. We've got this running on LinkedIn, YouTube, a whole bunch of different Facebook pages. So just throw this in the comments. Let me know if you have specific questions about starting your podcast, and happy to chime in and dive into that. So in terms of actually with the podcast and putting it all together here, and you know what, I kind of forget where I was going. You know what, let's switch over to editing, okay? And then I'll dive back in. So with editing the podcast, and then we'll get into analytics. So I'll just write analytics. Okay. So with editing the podcast, when you're starting out, it's really, really easy, right? So you start the podcast and you record you have your audio, you have the video. Honestly, like all you have to do is upload the audio. You're going to have a whole lot of ums in there, dead spaces, that kind of thing. But if you don't have the editing skill, it's far more important to publish your episode and get it out there than it is to have a perfectly edited podcast. Because remember, the first 20 episodes, nobody's going to listen anyway. So it really doesn't matter. The cool thing is on YouTube, you can go back. So Gary Vee is a good example. We were talking about Gary Vee yesterday. If you go back to Wine Library TV, you can watch Gary Vee episodes from back when he had a whole lot of hair and without the gray hair in there, and he's way younger. And some episodes have 500 views 12, 13 years later because he basically hit record, he went on, he talked about it, he pressed end or stop recording, and then he uploaded the file. There wasn't editing in there. So you don't need that to get started because this is basically your training wheels to get you going. So you don't need fancy editing software. You don't have to worry about fixing up the audio, that kind of thing. That comes later on. So bare bones, your first even 50, 100 episodes. Who cares? Just get it up there. Now, at some point, you're going to want to start editing the episodes to really condense things, take out dead sections. So a couple things to keep in mind when you actually do start editing. Don't start editing on day one. It's going to add costs. It's going to add reasons for you not to do it. I would rather you do more episodes and bump up your quantity rather than worrying about the quality. But when you are editing, you want to figure out you want to eliminate dead space. So pauses in between questions, because you'll find now the best performing content is the one that keeps going. So whether it's a podcast format, YouTube videos, taking out the oohs, ums, the silences, and just keep it really, really steady. That keeps the viewer or the listener engaged at all times rather than having dead spaces, because a dead space is a perfect time for that person to lose focus. They look on their phone, they see something else, they click, and now they're no longer listening. So you want to really keep it moving at a good clip. And then you can also eliminate sections. So you can delete sections if it doesn't fit. So you can go in and let's say you have 60 minutes of audio content. You can cut that down to a 40-minute show or a 30-minute show really easily, because guests coming on, if you're doing an interview format, it's going to be really easy to go off on tangents, talk about a whole bunch of different stuff, and it just won't have the same impact. So you can really condense it. Same with YouTube videos, right? So I'll record 30 minutes and that gets edited down into 16, that kind of thing. And then you'll also want to fix up the audio. So there are tools that you can do yourself. So there's a great tool called Isotope. It does it all by itself. So basically you upload the audio file, you click dialogue, and it will use its AI kind of stuff, and then it'll fix it up. You can pay audio editors on Fiverr if you want, on Upwork. I don't care how you do it. But what I learned myself is, at some point, if you're producing a high quantity of podcast episodes, the last thing you want to do is, if you record 3 podcast episodes in a day, is to then switch over to editing. So at that point, you want to have somebody taking that off your shoulders, and that's just going to help you breathe and relax a little bit more. Okay, so that's that. So now let's talk about analytics and some cool things I found in terms of podcast analytics. Okay. So what I found with my podcast when we were running it, now this might be different for other audiences. It really depends. But for my podcast, we found the best time to upload was about 5:30 a.m. EST. Now, the reason is a lot of people like to go to the gym in the morning and then they listen to a podcast. And this is why a lot of podcasts, except for the long form ones, but a lot of them are shorter. They're 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, because you're on the treadmill at the gym, or, you're just listening in between sets. This is a perfect time format. So for my podcast, when we got going, is we were between 20 to 30 minutes. And I think that's ideal, especially if you're a beginner, because it doesn't put too much pressure on you. It's pretty easy to fill 30 minutes up of conversation. And it's not onerous, like, an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours. It's like, when I'm worrying about talking on stage for an hour, like that's a lot of time to fill up. Even if it's 90 minutes, it's a lot of time to fill up. But 20 to 30 minutes with a guest interviewing back and forth, you can fill that really easily. So that takes off a whole lot of pressure on you. Okay, so the best time we found was Wednesdays at 5:30 a.m. EST. Take it for what it's worth. If you're launching a podcast, rock and roll with that. Start at 5:30. Aim for 20 to 30 minutes in terms of podcast episode length. It's long enough to get a point across, but it's not too long that it becomes onerous on you and that kind of thing. Okay. And then what we also found was when we started clipping things and all that stuff, you're going to find that subjects really pop out. So there's different ways that we can upload our podcast. We use something called Libsyn. Now, there's different platforms here, but Libsyn basically syndicates that podcast out to all the different platforms. So, you've got Apple Podcasts, you got, you had Spotify, you have Stitcher, even though Stitcher's not around anymore, they're closing up shop. It basically syndicated that podcast out to all the different platforms. Now, what this does is it gives you the number of downloads. So you can start testing things with your podcast. So here's a couple of categories you want to test for and watch out once you start uploading episodes. Because chances are, let's say you have a real estate investing podcast. I'll just use that as an example. You may do different podcasts on different types of real estate investing. So you may do some episodes on fix and flips, some on single family rentals, some on Airbnb short term, some on multifamily, some on commercial, right? So you're going to have all your different categories right here of episode. Now you're going to want to start an Excel sheet and start tracking the number of downloads for each episode based on the category. Okay, so you have downloads right here. And, maybe podcast 1, when you're starting out, will have 20 downloads. Category 2 may have 50 on average of all the episodes, right? This one may have 12, and this one may have 25. So pretty quickly, you're going to see which topics really pop out for your audience and what you're attracting. So in this case, it would be the 50. So now you double down on that 50, and now for the next, let's say 2 months, you do variations of that category of episode. And now you're going to figure out from here, you have a subcategory right here. And now you're going to test to see over the next couple months, which ones really pop out here. So maybe this one will have 100 downloads. This one will have 25. This one will have 35. This one will have 90. So now these two subcategories within this macro category are the topics that really resonate with your audience, right? You see how we did it? So we basically tested. So we tried 4 different categories of topic. We watched our stats to see downloads, and then we figured out our subcategories. Now, a couple of caveats with this when you're getting going, right? So what you want to do is you want to have a decent sample size. So in your first 5 episodes, it doesn't matter. Your first 20 episodes, it doesn't matter. But once you start getting a decent audience, so likely around episode 100, I would say a podcast episode from 100 to 150, you really want to start testing this type of stuff, because there's no point in delivering podcast episodes that nobody wants to download, right? So you have to worry about titling of the podcast. You have to worry about the guest. So some guests will attract more people than other guests. That's just the way it is. So you want to take that into consideration. So that's why what we did was we lumped all the different categories together, and then we averaged it out just to get a content category average, and then we figured out the subcategories, and then we started testing that way. Okay, does that make sense? Just put that in the chat and let me know if that makes sense. Okay, cool, awesome. Now after that, now it becomes now you start looking at your podcast wide, right? So with your podcast, you're going to be tracking the total number of downloads, because the thing that blew my mind was way back, I would release a podcast a year before, and then 12 months later, I'd still be getting like 400 downloads a month on this podcast episode that I did a year before. So now, after we figure out your subcategories and what's really hitting, you're going to be looking at your podcast as a whole for monthly downloads. So you'll see your month like this, and the more data you get, the better it is. And you'll start seeing like this, and you'll start seeing like downloads changing and everything. So now you have to worry about, okay, well, if I'm trending down, what is it? Did I start running on a new topic? Did we stop doing certain types of guests? Did my style change? Did my editor change? Did the thumbnails we're using change? So now you want to look at a macro level of your podcast and see, hey, where's my growth trending? What's going on that way? So a couple things I picked up on the podcast episode is you never want to delete an episode. The reason is, like I mentioned, we had some episodes that I recorded 2 years before, and for whatever reason, is they decided to pop off like a year later. I don't know what happened, but that's just the way it is. So even though you have like your shittiest episodes, like episode 1 to 20 at the beginning, don't get rid of them, because sometimes for whatever reason they'll pop off. Okay, so never delete an episode, no matter how embarrassing it is, because like it, for whatever reason, if it works, it works. Okay, so once you finish your testing that way, you're looking at the macro stats for your channel. That's basically what you're monitoring at that point, and now you're just trying to elevate things. So one of the things that I learned with running a podcast is, as soon as you have a podcast over 100 episodes, that's when you start getting a lot more traction, especially with people whose job it is to place people on podcast episodes. And this is where things kind of started going off the rails for me, and when I started losing my appetite for running the podcast. So what happens is you have 100 episodes. It means you're consistent with it. You probably have a growing audience. Now, that's going to depend on your niche, but you're going to have some type of growth there. There are companies out there who people pay to have them put to get them spots on a podcast. So they'll pay them a monthly fee, and they will email everybody. Now, what happens is you're going to get bombarded with emails, and we still get emails, even though we're not running the podcast anymore. Every day I get emails from people. We're still on the list being like, hey, I have a great guest for you. At first, it seems great, being like, oh, all these people want to be on my podcast. But I just want to caution you to make sure that you stick with your guns on the vision for your podcast. So we talked about that yesterday. You have the vision, who you want to help, because very quickly you just become a rotating conveyor belt of people who you have no interest in talking to. You've never met them before. People are just bringing them and hounding you to get them on your podcast. And like, it's just, if it's not fitting with your vision, you're going to end up like me, where it's like, yeah, it's great, but like, I'm not feeling it anymore. And then you take it out behind the barn, and it's done. Okay. So when you're launching your podcast, make sure every guest you bring on aligns with your vision. Don't go off track, because then you just end up, it's just kind of crappy. Okay. So main thing with the podcast, you're building your Rolodex, you're building your connections. Like I said, I would not have been able to actually launch my conference if I hadn't run the podcast. And it's teaching you skills. So it's teaching you how to ask questions, how to market, right? How to track analytics, like all this kind of stuff. A podcast is a great learning ground for starting to build these things out. Now, if you don't want to run a podcast, now I launched my podcast before I even listened to a podcast before. I wasn't a podcast guy, but I figured it out. If you don't want to launch a podcast, you can dive into YouTube. Now, my YouTube channel is small in the grand scheme of things. We're almost at 6,000 people. We're getting just under 200 new subscribers a month. So we're still kind of new, right? It hasn't been given the love and attention that it needs, which is why we're bringing somebody on whose only job it is to do content for us. So we're going to see some big changes with that. So with YouTube or video, there are a lot of advantages. You can run it like a podcast, but you're going to have less competition, but it's going to be a whole lot harder. Let me explain. So with the podcast, we had a very low barrier to entry, right? Like everybody can start a podcast. You just need a computer. That's all you need. With YouTube, you have to be able to talk on video. So right now we're doing a live stream. This is being pumped out to a whole bunch of different locations. Talking for 2 hours, for 2.5 hours is hard to do. Like not many people can do it because it takes confidence. You need to be able to talk on the camera. You have to be well prepared. You have to have notes so you stay on track and don't go off on tangents, that kind of thing. So what it's going to do is it's going to eliminate a lot of the competition that you have with the podcast. So with what I did is I launched the podcast, then I started the YouTube channel, and then concurrently we launched the TV show, and then we ended up with the conference. So let's just cover the YouTube and video. So less competition is a big plus because so many people are scared of going on camera. Now, I will tell you, it's not as bad as you think. It's really awkward for the first couple times, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad, and you'll rock and roll like a rock star. But a lot of people get in their head. It's a limiting belief. I need to look perfect to be on camera. I can't, I have to have the best hair day ever before I go on camera. Everybody's going to judge me. Well, guess what? You walk to the grocery store, people see you anyway, they judge you. So who cares if it's on the internet? Because like chances are somebody's filming a selfie anyway, or a selfie video, and you get captured and you're on the internet, whether you like it or not. So might as well control it and take advantage and profit from it. Okay. So there's less competition for doing YouTube and video, but there are higher standards in terms of content. So as you start growing and scaling your channel, you can start off doing direct to camera. So Hormozy is a great example of this. His first videos, content was great. He was talking on a crappy webcam and sharing his screen. If the content's good, people will like it. But then there's an expectation, especially now with YouTube, the top players on YouTube, they have professional sets, they have full media teams. It's basically run like a TV show. Like it's basically a TV show, but just streaming on YouTube. So we've seen a huge change over the past, decade in terms of video production content. But don't let that scare you from starting out, because just like a podcast, you've got podcast studios. Like there's guys who have these huge outfits that all they do is produce podcasts. It doesn't matter. You just have to get started and then worry about that stuff later. So there's less competition, but that's a benefit to us. You just have to speak on camera, and that's going to give you way more confidence, because at some point, if you're expanding your brand, you're going to be invited to speak places. And speaking on camera is great practice for speaking in front of an audience, because right now you're like we do some live streams sometimes we do pre-recorded. It really depends. But if you're doing a live stream, that's just like being on the stage. If you mess up, it doesn't matter. You keep rolling with the punches. So with video, there's something to do in terms of how you want to build out your channel or your platform, right? You can become an education format. You can entertainment. Oh, I just totally butchered spelling entertainment. It doesn't matter. So, and then you can have lists, like listicles, that kind of thing. So with education, that's strictly education based. You have questions that people are asking. You answer those questions. You become like an encyclopedia kind of thing. Right? With entertainment, you're doing silly stuff. Like Mr. Beast is an entertainment channel. He will take a Lamborghini and crush it, or have a tank and try and blow up a car. My son likes watching his stuff. It's just really entertaining. He does a great job at keeping it moving at a good clip. That's one way you can do it. And then you can do listicles. So like the top 10 reasons this, top 5 reasons that, 5 reasons to do this, top 10 blunders in this thing. It can kind of go into education, kind of go into entertainment, but listicles is its own kind of category for some channels. Some channels are based just on lists and doing the listicle kind of thing. Now, there's a couple ways that you can actually find the questions people are asking. So question number 1, or place number 1, is answer the public. So Answer the Public, you can go in there, type in a category, and it will actually pull out Google searches that people have done. So, it's if people are searching for something, there's an audience there, especially if you're running a more of like a educational type of content approach with this. This works for podcasts too, for content ideas, for TV show ideas. Answer the Public, great. Google Trends is another one. If you want to stay current, you can find what topics are currently trending on Google, and that's a great piece of a great idea. So you can run some content off of that, right? If interest rates are trending on Google, well, might as well do a podcast episode on interest rates, or might as well do a YouTube video or some other video type of content on interest rates, because that's what people are interested in. That's what they're searching for, right? Or Taylor Swift yesterday was trending with football, right? So it all depends. And then also another place to go is you just search on YouTube itself or Google. And then you want to look at the autocomplete. So what you do is you go into Google, start searching, you say real estate, and then it will autocomplete and give you some options. Those are topics that people are already searching for, and Google's offering those as suggestions to you. Those are great examples or great content ideas to use for your podcast or for your videos, right? Because when you think about it, YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. Google's number one. Google happens to own YouTube. So there's a lot of cross-pollination there. And even with our YouTube stats, like some of our top performing videos, we get a ton of traffic from search. And this is where having trending topics, making sure you're answering relevant questions. And there's tools out there. There's tools like TubeBuddy, vidIQ, Morning Fame that can actually help you title the keywords, all of that kind of stuff. Okay. So to get started with video, all you really need is your cell phone. Your cell phone has better cameras now that were commercially available a couple years ago. So just start running it off your cell phone. I would suggest you get a lavalier mic. So a microphone just kind of like this, because it's going to eliminate a whole lot of echo from the audio, especially if you're outside running off your camera's audio. It's not going to work so well. It's going to pick up a ton of echo and especially wind. But on here with the lav mic, this is going to get you the very best audio recording possible. With the podcast, you can get like the stand-up mic right in front of you. Those are cheap on Amazon. But for video, lav mic, totally the way to go. Some people prefer to have a backup shotgun mic, which is kind of sits on top of the camera. But when you're first starting out, you just need your phone. You can get a little cheap iPad from Amazon, put it there, and you just record your video. That's all you need. Don't overthink it. Just like the podcast, bang out your first 20 episodes with a video, bang out your first 20 videos. I don't care how bad it looks, how bad the lighting is. Like, we still don't have the best lighting. You still don't have the best set over here, but we're pumping out videos because it's the content that matters, right? So who cares what it looks like? Now, that being said, once you start getting good with it, then we can talk about editing and editing styles, right? So you've probably noticed, if you're on my YouTube channel, we have very minimalistic editing because that's what we were doing. You're going to see a big change over the next couple months as we put more and more resources into it, because we really want to grow that side of our business, right? So to get started off, we were producing content. Some of our videos really took off. Some of the videos didn't. But just like we did with the podcast in terms of testing, you're going to see similarities in terms of which topics really take off, which topics don't, because the market wants what the market wants. So don't try and force certain content onto the market if it doesn't want it. The easiest thing is figure out what the market's looking for and deliver it, and making sure it aligns with your vision and what you want to do. So we had a whole bunch of different ideas yesterday with the visions we wanted to help out with. But for mine, we want to help 100 million people become more educated with real estate so they can better their lives. So for us to reach 100 million people, we can't focus on just one specific thing. We have to go a little bit broader. So now we have to figure out, well, what topics are going to be resonating with the audience, right? So maybe people want to learn about passive investing in real estate. Maybe people want to learn how to find deals, how to find markets, all that kind of stuff, right? That's how you have to take your content tree. So this applies to everything, but we'll talk about this in the YouTube section. So you're going to have different content pillars, right? So we'll have pillar number 1, pillar number 2, pillar number 3. I would start off with 3 to begin with because it's going to be easier, and then you're going to build up from there. So what you want to do is you want to think about it up front. Okay, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I want to have a whole bunch of different videos and all that kind of stuff. What you want to do is figure out, okay, these are the 3 main pillars of content that I'm going to start building on. So let's say we are in, we had an example yesterday talking about debt, right? Helping people with large amounts of debt. So you can talk about, you can talk about like theories behind money. So how money works. So we'll just say money there. Why people get into debt, because it's because of their thinking. We can have debt reduction strategies. So how you actually, if you have the debt now, how do we reduce it? And then we can also have as a third strategy, so how people get in debt, what to do when you are in debt, and then the impact on getting out of debt. Now that in itself could give you a ton of content ideas for those 3 pillars. So every single week you could publish a video on how people get in debt, what to do when you're in debt, and then the impact of getting out of debt, right? Or strategies to use debt to your advantage to get into good assets, that kind of thing, right? This keeps you on track, so you always know what's coming up next. Maybe if you're doing a weekly video, you alternate. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And what you'll find with your analytics, and when you're watching all of the numbers, you'll find maybe debt reduction. This is your top topic. So maybe you'll do 50% of your content here, 25% here, 25% here. You have to watch your numbers with your content once you get a decent amount out there, and that's going to guide you on which way to go. For us on our YouTube channel, the syndication topic, real estate syndication, is really popular. The other topics that I might feel are really important, people don't really watch those as much. So guess what? We do more syndication videos on the YouTube channel, and some of them are our best performing videos of all time. So like you have to watch this stuff, but having these content pillars is crucial because it keeps you on track, and you can always add more content pillars. So this is the stage we're at right now. We actually have a meeting on Friday going over this, right? So we had our initial pillars, but now we're adding a couple more just to broaden things out, to bring in fresh audience and get some more eyeballs and really grow our audience that way. But for just starting out, I would say 3 content pillars. So a real estate example, maybe it's passive real estate investing. You could do why passively invest in real estate. You could do structures or like ways you can actually tap into passive real estate investments, and how to know if a passive real estate investment is good or bad. All your content focuses on these 3 things. Or if you want to go broader, right? Maybe you're a business coach, something like that. You could do, business systems and operations. You could do marketing and advertising, and then you could go sales. That covers your umbrella topic of your business coach. And these are 3 relevant topics that your audience is going to be looking for. So if you're within like a smaller niche, you kind of go like this with the debt, or if you're a broader business coach, relationship coach, something like that, relationship coach, how to actually approach somebody and ask for their number, dates, best date spots, how to actually run a date, and then maybe how to take things to the next level if the date goes really well. Maybe something like that for date options. Okay. So does that make sense, guys? Does that make sense? Just let me know in the chat if we're following along with the content ideas. So it's not really rocket science, because like I remember when I first started doing this stuff, I thought, whoa, like this is really complicated. I can't. There's no way I'd be able to handle this out. Trust me, like this is how people run this stuff. Now it gets more complex. Like you can have full like media teams working for you, but at the end of the day, you have your content pillars. You figure it out, and you build your content pillars out. So let's say you have your pillar 1, 2, 3, and then you have your relevant questions. This way, it just makes it really easy. Now, before I get over to the TV show stuff, I'll just talk about the content calendar topic a little bit and the best way to run things. Okay, so I'm going to draw a calendar right here. So you have all your different days of the week. obviously this is not to scale. We have 4 days this week. So what you want to do is you want to have a consistent schedule. Now, yeah, does your audience like having a video? Your hardcore audience will, for sure. But most of your audience that you're going to get on video on YouTube, even for podcast, they're not subscribed to you, right? So like it doesn't really, subscribers don't really matter. So when you publish, it does matter, yeah, but it's more for yourself, especially when you're starting off. So you want to map out with your calendar all the different days of the week, and you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to publish a new episode every Wednesday. Great. Now, back when I was doing the podcast, I learned this lesson really, really quickly. I used to, if I was publishing a daily podcast, so every single day, I would interview somebody every single day, a couple days ahead, and then I would publish the episode. So I was kind of running. It was like just-in-time delivery, like they do in factories, right? And that got really, really complicated. Your head is always worrying about the podcast. What you really want to do is start batching your content. So what I started doing then is I would do 3 episodes a day, recording them on the podcast. And then after two days, so I would record episodes on Monday, Tuesday. That gave me 6. And sometimes I would do a 4th on a really long day, but then I was good for the rest of the week, right? And then I could focus on other things for this week, and I got my 2 content days done. That's if you're doing a daily podcast. If you're doing, twice a week, 3 times a week, you do your content maybe one day, and that gets you taken care of for the week. Now, once you start adding different things into it, like YouTube and all that stuff, you'll probably want to focus on full media days. So in a month, you may decide that you want to record all of your content, all of your videos on the first Monday of the week and the second Monday of the week. You get all that stuff done because you're only focused. So it really depends on how your brain works. But for my brain, at least, I like to. It's really good to compartmentalize. So if I'm just focused on one thing, I get better results. So what you do is the couple days leading up to this, you're writing all your scripts, all your ideas, like you're mapping it out. You show up. Your only job that day is to produce that content, just like it was for me with the podcast. My only job that day was to bang out 4 podcast episodes. And that's it. You're only worrying about the podcast. You're not worrying about a sale coming the next day. You're not worrying about staff. You're not worrying about anything else. You're just worried about your content. For me, my personal opinion, that's the best way to go. But if you're a different personality, do whatever works for you. All that matters is pumping out the content. But now what we're doing is we're switching. Now that we're really ramping things up, you're going to see some big changes over the next couple months. We're switching more to these content days where we're actually going off site and filming specific content for maybe 2 days in a row, batching that, having 12 hours of footage that then gets spliced up into a whole bunch of different stuff. So just some personal tips and some personal experience there. You really want to divide, batch this kind of stuff, or else it will take up your entire life. And remember, the content is there to support growing your brand, your reach, and your credibility. Is not there to run your life. So by batching, you're compressing it. Yeah, you're still getting the same output, but it becomes more manageable in your greater headspace. So just some tips there. So why don't we do this? We're going to take a quick break. I need to get some water because I'm going to lose my voice. We'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, and then I'll talk about the TV show, and then I'll talk about my conference experience. So stay tuned. We'll be back in 10 minutes. All right, here we go. So I got a drink, so my voice is ready to rock and roll. Okay, so let's talk about the TV show and let's talk about the conference because I actually get a lot of questions about the TV show stuff and the conference. So basically, what was going on is I realized that, hey, listen, to actually get some more like credibility in the space, like having a TV show, it just sounds really cool. And when we were talking with investors and other things, when they're like, oh, yeah, I've got a TV show, they're like, oh, that's really cool. So what had happened was I'd filmed some segments related to real estate for this outfit like years before. And they had always mentioned that, hey, yeah, it would be really cool to actually have a real estate related TV show. Kept that in the back of my mind. When I went through the life changes, I started the podcast, and then basically I called them up and I said, hey, listen, like, are you guys still looking to run this TV show? And they're like, oh, yeah, we might talk about it. I'm like, okay, great. Well, I set the meeting and I had no idea what I was doing. So I had to Google how to actually pitch a TV show. Basically what you want to do is you want to find someplace with a need. Now, there's different ways to do this. I can tell you about pros and cons and why we actually stopped doing the TV show. And I'll dive into all of that kind of stuff. Okay. So what you want to do is you actually want to figure out what type of market you're going for, right? Because if you're going for a local market right here, having some sort of local television presence works really well. So maybe you're a real estate agent in a local market or something, having a regional cable TV show, that works really well. Like, you know, everybody, some people, you know, get it included with their internet, that kind of thing. It works really well. Okay, so that's your local market. But if you're looking for a wider national or international market, the TV route may or may not work for you, right? There's obviously, you can go after big things like HGTV, all that kind of stuff. So like sometimes now with like the conference and stuff we're doing, people will approach me and be like, hey, listen, we're thinking of this TV show. What do you think? Would you be interested? That kind of thing. But you want to go on a more national level. So with us, we had the cable TV show, but we found, and it was available all across the province of Ontario if you're a Canadian, but the reach ended there. So yeah, it was cool to say we had a TV show, but what we found was, hey, if we double down on content and all that stuff, we can reach way more people because we weren't able to hit our vision. This is why it goes back to the vision. So my vision is to help 100 million people make better real estate decisions through education. So we were too limited with the market and the reach with that show. So that's why we ended it. So if you're going to go on the TV side and you want to get into the TV show stuff, really think about what type of market, the size, the total available market, and the reach for that show. Okay. So if you want to go national, you can buy space. So there's a couple ways you can do it. Number one, you can actually become like the host of a show or a special guest, a recurring guest on a current show for whatever industry you're in. That's a great way to do it. You can host a show. Some people actually buy space. So I didn't end up doing this. They funded it. But some people will actually buy the block of time on a Sunday morning at 10 a.m. You buy that block of time. It's your cost to produce the show, but in turn you get full, like you own that space, so you can do whatever you want. With the way I did it, it was funded for me. But we had a general agreement on what would be covered, the type of guests we would have, the type of topics we would do, the style of the show. So it was more back and forth collaboration because we weren't putting any money into it. Like it was totally funded for us. So pros and cons with that way. But if you are going to do it, just think about the size. If you have a grand vision, don't limit yourself with the market like we did, because we ended it because it just didn't align with our greater vision. So TV show, it's a whole lot of fun. People, when you invite them on a TV show to be a guest, they get pretty excited. They get pretty nervous, like I said yesterday. So a couple things to keep in mind when you're dealing with guests, especially on podcasts, even with video and stuff like that. So people naturally get really hesitant when they're on camera. So many times we'd be talking in the green room, invite somebody like total expert in their field. They knew their stuff. I knew them. I'd spoken with them before. I knew they were a good fit to come on my show. As soon as they sit down and the lights go on, the red light goes on the cameras, and you're rocking and rolling, a lot of people, they'll clam up. And the person you had before is not the person you have sitting in front of you. And then it's like, oh boy, because now it's going to be a long 20 whatever minutes, 23 minutes or whatever it is to get the TV show done. So you always want to make sure, and the same goes for on stage. I'll talk about that a little bit later on with the conference, but you really want to vet people and make sure that when they are coming on, they're confident on camera. So, maybe they do YouTube videos, whatever it is, because if you get somebody that clams up and they're one of two guests, well, guess what? You have to talk with them, and it's like pulling teeth sometimes. So you want to make sure that they're comfortable on camera. With the television show, it's actually, the format's really easy to do if you're doing talking head. So yesterday I shared how I really respected Chris Gray, who's an Australian real estate investor. And I actually really liked how he ran his show. It was a whole lot of fun, good charisma, good information. He had great guests. So I wanted to model that for my show. So it was talking head format, and talking head format is the lowest cost to produce. You're in the studio. They ended up building us a new set for our second season. So it was pretty good. So what you've got is you have a desk like this. You have one person, two, three. I would always suggest you have more than one guest on the show, because it feels really, really long when you're the interviewer. If you are only speaking with one person and you're trying to fill that, if your show's 30 minutes, you're going to have your commercial breaks and stuff too, but it still feels really long with one person. So it does give you variety in terms of by having two different guests on there. So very different from a podcast episode. Myself, I found that running a podcast, doing an interview with two people at the same time, very challenging to do. Very challenging, because you have to address specific people for answering the questions, that kind of thing. TV show, flip that around. Have two people if you're going talking head. Don't just go one guest, because it feels like a decade by the time you finish that episode, right? Especially if that person clams up. And if you're not dealing with national TV, generally speaking, with the national stuff, you vet the guests, but sometimes you still get people that clam up. And you can tell when they have a guest expert that's not comfortable on camera. The host of the show has to do a whole lot more talking. The interviewer has to really add context in the questions. And you can tell, especially if you've been in that place, because you're filling the airtime now with and trying to help the audience understand and really build out some meatier chunks around some very bare bones answers that you're getting, which is not ideal. Okay. So by having two people, if one person clams up, you can start feeding them questions, that kind of thing. So the format I ran, now take it for what it's worth. This is just the way I approached it, and it worked well for me. So we would have two guests on the show. I would do the intro. We would cut to our intro reel. So you film the introduction. I'm notorious for messing up the introduction, so I'd mess it up like 4 times. Then I'd be good for the rest of the show. But it was always hard for me to get the words out of my mouth to start off, because I was starting cold, right? So you do the introduction, you'll cut, they'll edit all the intros and stuff like that. For me, I would divide the show into 3 segments, right? So it would look like 1, 2, 3. So the way I like to approach things is we would have topic number 1, go with speaker number 1. So it would just be back and forth. And now we would always try and get our guests where they had some commonality amongst themselves. So we were a real estate, general interest type of real estate show, because we were trying to take more complicated real estate topics and break them down, so the person at home could actually be like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense. Now I know, now I can make a better real estate decision, whether it was buying a house, investing in real estate, that kind of thing. So let's say, for instance, we were talking about financing here and home renovations here. we would try and get guests where we would pair up personalities. So you really wouldn't want to get two people who like to talk a lot, because then they just talk over each other. So you want to find a good balance there. And also with topic, you want to get people where they can chime in on each other. So the best episodes we ever had were where we had a question with guest number one, with guest number one's topic, but then guest number two could chime in here and there, and we actually have a really good organic conversation. Cut to commercial break here. Then for segment two, it flips. So I would start asking primary questions to number two. Guest number one would chime in here and there. Good organic conversation. Great. And then for the third topic, I always try to find a topic to talk about where both people could equally contribute. Now, sometimes this was challenging, but we try to do that. And that way, both guests, they feel like rock stars because they're the center of attention for these, and then they can throw in their 2 cents with the third segment. And depending on the channel you're on, the amount of time you have, like we were a half-hour show, so like you don't really have too much time in between, and it goes really fast. So like some segments, like you're 8 minutes long for a segment. Like that's like you don't have a whole lot of time, so you have to be really concise. Now the great thing with television, and this is one of the big learning experiences with TV, is you have to keep things on track. So you only have this amount of time right here. So you can get question 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, depending. If you find a guest, if you ask a question and the guest is going on and on and on, and you're only at question 1, you want to learn how to interject in a very respectful way and end that, and then hop over to question number 2. So this is great for sales because on television, you're learning how to interject in a polite way and guide the conversation where it doesn't feel like you're stepping in and saying, hey, stop talking about this, let's talk about something else. In sales, we all have prospects where we'll get on the phone and they'll go off on a tangent. And a lot of people have trouble controlling that and keeping them on the straight line if, like using like a JB straight line system. So by doing this TV show, it really made me better at stepping in and guiding conversations. And then that makes me a better interviewer. If we're doing a podcast, it makes me a better interviewer. If I'm on stage with somebody like A-Rod, Grant, Kevin, whoever it is, interviewing them, I'm able to guide that conversation a whole lot better. So that's how we ran the TV show. 1-2 format, talking head, low production value. They built us a nice set in the second year. It was good. And the main thing here for us, yeah, it's great for the people on the audience, but just like the podcast, the Rolodex, like bring people on your TV show, that was pretty cool to do. And people really appreciated that. So that's on the TV side. If you have any questions about the TV side, just let me know, throw that in the comment section, and then we'll keep rock and rolling here. Okay, so now let's head over to the conference. And this is where I have a whole lot of passion because, as I said yesterday, I hate events with a passion. I hate real estate events with a passion because what a lot of events do is they'll rent a hotel ballroom. They'll have a bunch of round tables. They have a small little stage. They have 2 PowerPoint slides, and then people get up there and talk all the time, and it's boring, and I can't stand them, especially if the food is really bad. So with conferences, I take a different approach. What was the TV show called? Yeah, it was called Real Estate Simplified. So that was on the Cogeco network in Ontario. So yeah, it was fun. So with conferences, I take we'll break it down this way. So the very first thing to run a successful event is you need something that I call gravitational pull. So gravitational pull. So what I want you to think about is think of the solar system, right? Before a star is born, the dawn of the solar system, right? We have a nebula here. We have gas and dust. There's no mass here. It's just there. Now, what happens is it starts clumping together, and pretty soon we end up with some mass, right? And that turns into a star. The star has that gravitational pull, and it pulls all the planets into orbit around it, right? We have all the different planets here, and now everything is orbiting around the star. This is what you have to do with your event. And this is where the majority of events fail. So many events come to us and they'll say, hey, Seth, can you help me out? I have a marketing problem with my event. Hey, Seth, I can't fill seats. What's going on? Like my ads aren't converting. Well, yeah, the marketing side needs help, but it's really step number one here, building an event that pulls people in. And this is where so many people get it wrong. And this is why events don't really scale. And this is why we've been able to scale to such a large size in such a short period of time. So a couple things go into that gravitational pull, and I'll give you my own example, right? You need some sizzle, you need some transformation, and then you have to have the care factor. Okay, so let's go on the bottom up. The care factor. Why do people care about your event? If you can't answer that question, nobody's going to buy tickets. And this is why most people struggle to fill a room, because nobody gives a shit, right? Like in the grand scheme of the market, why should people care about your event? What is it that makes them care? If you can't answer that question, you're going to have trouble selling tickets and filling seats, right? The transformation side. People show up to events, people do things to have a transformation. Are you taking them from being somebody who's new at making videos to becoming a professional video editor? Is that the transformation they want? Is it somebody coming in who's overweight, who wants to learn and become a fit, in shape person? Is that the transformation they want? This is why people show up to events. They want to transform themselves into something with real estate, right? They show up, they want to transform into a professional real estate investor. This is why people show up to events. So you need your transformation, you need the care factor, and now you need the sizzle, right? The sizzle catches people's attention. You can't have a boring event. So 99% of real estate events out there, because real estate's my space, are in a hotel ballroom. Like they look boring. It's like, what's the sizzle? What's going to capture my attention and be like, oh, what is this thing? Let me learn more. That's what's missing. So this gravitational pull is made up of these three components: the sizzle, the transformation, and the care factor. You need to be able to succinctly answer those 3 points to have to build out an event that is able to scale, right? So once we do that, once we have a strong gravitational pull for the event, then we have to worry about what I call the event triad. Okay, so the event triad is made up of 3 different pieces here. So you have your speakers, you have your sponsors, and then you have your attendees. And my writing is going downhill fast, but you'll just have to deal with it. Okay, so speakers, sponsors, attendees. Now, the interesting thing with events is this event triad, these 3 components are in direct competition with each other almost all the time. Let me explain. The sponsors want to extract something from the attendees, whether it's information, whether it's money, whatever it is. The sponsor, that's why they're sponsoring the event. They want to extract something from the attendee. The speaker is in conflict with the sponsor oftentimes because the speaker doesn't want to get overshadowed by the sponsor and vice versa. So there's conflict there, right? The attendee wants something from the sponsor, right? Because the event can't happen without sponsors, but then the attendee often doesn't want to give up what the sponsor wants them to give up. So this is what you could call attendees, spectators, and yeah, that's right, the 3 S's. I like that. Good suggestion, right? So this is so we have conflict at every stage of the game. Now, the secret sauce to putting events together is putting this event triad in a way where these 3 factors can interact and make the event work without having conflict and it splits apart. And I can tell you from personal experience, sometimes it's harder to do, but you have to find a way to fit those puzzle pieces together. And it works really, really well. Okay. So for instance, let me go into what attracts speakers, right? Because each of these components is looking for different things out of the audience. Speakers want size, right? So if you're looking for top tier speakers, they're looking for a size of audience that fits their level. So, you know, a big speaker, let's say like Kevin O'Leary, won't show up for 200 people, but he will show up for 2,000, right? The people, oh yeah, Lamia, sorry, I meant to do that. And then I got then I got talking about this stuff. Yeah. So for myself, when I was, so Lamia, we have it on screen here. Could you give us an example of the care factor transformation sizzle applied to MFC? Yeah. So when I first started out, I turned to my fiance. We were watching Shark Tank. I said, I'm going to run a real estate investing conference with Kevin O'Leary speaking. And she turned to me and she said, yeah, whatever. It's just another crazy idea. And then I made it happen. So I was starting with nothing. And that's kind of going back to that gravitational pull. I was that nebula before I turned into the star. So I was like, okay, how can I start building this thing together? So the very first thing I did was I went out and I got Kevin O'Leary interested in speaking at the event. First thing I did, right? I needed some sort of pull, that anchor there. And that gave me credibility, right? Because now what I did, so I started here, let me do this. So I started with Kevin, right? Kevin gave me credibility. And because I told Darcy that I was going to have Kevin, so I needed to have Kevin. So I started with Kevin. Now what I did was I went out and talked with speakers that I knew through my podcast and said, hey, listen, I'm thinking about putting this event together. I've got Kevin O'Leary on board. Would you be interested in speaking? Now they wanted, hey, like that was a big step up. They want to be involved in the event with Kevin O'Leary. So now I got some of those speakers interested in coming on board with Kevin. So I had a bunch here. So now I started to get that mass, right? So now I have Kevin, now I have some speakers, now I actually have an event that's worth coming to. And now I can start going out to some sponsors and said, hey, listen, I have this event. We've got speakers that have, X billions of dollars under management. We have Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. Like this is the type of audience we're doing. You want to get involved. Then I got the first couple sponsors, right? So now I got sponsors involved, and all of a sudden, out of nothing, you have an event, the nucleus of the event that starts taking form, right? So now you have some sponsors, you have some speakers, you have Kevin O'Leary, and now the missing piece is the attendee, which I'll get to in terms of the event triad. But in terms of the sizzle, let me go through the three things. So the sizzle was, the Kevin O'Leary thing. Like it does add sizzle, a celebrity. So you'll notice with MFC, what I do is this past year in May, we had Alex Rodriguez, who was excellent. Grant Cardone, like it's Uncle G, he was our most requested speaker to bring in. I bring in those top tier speakers because it adds the sizzle, right? It catches attention. When we run ads for our events, anything with, our celebrity speakers face on it outperforms everything else. Because it catches people's attention and it snaps them out of it, and it gets them asking questions and trying to figure out what we're doing. So that's the sizzle. Also combined with the sizzle is you can tell my personality shines through with the conference. We have fire. Like this past year, we had an 180-foot screen. I kind of wrapped a little bit around. We have high production value because when I'm going to an event, I really, really hate what most people do in terms of just the boringness. So I went completely the other way. So we have the fire, we have the music, we have the lights, we have the big screens, all that kind of stuff to make sure the production's high. That's the sizzle when you get there, but nobody knows about the, well, now we have a reputation, but with the first event, nobody knew about it. So the sizzle was Kevin. Okay. The transformation was, our niche was multifamily real estate, apartment building investing. So the transformation that we were offering there was, hey, I'll take you from where you're at right now, maybe doing single family homes, maybe learning about real estate investing. And we will teach you what all the top real estate investors in the space are doing. So now you can become a knowledgeable professional apartment building investor. That's the transformation. That's the arc. And all the topics we have, and we're constantly learning and shifting and adapting things in terms of topics, but that's the arc we're going. So, and within that, we have different tiers now. So it's like, hey, if you're an intermediate apartment building investor, let's transform you into a large scale operator. If you're a brand new beginner, let's transform you into somebody who gets their first deal done. Those are the transformational arcs that we have. And then the care factor is, well, like with our first event, the care factor, quite honestly, was we were an in-person event because we were fresh out of lockdowns. Like I remember we were like 3 weeks from having the lockdown opened before we had our first event. Like it was pretty scary on the back end because we had a couple like lockdowns extended. I was shooting bricks. It was pretty nerve-wracking, but it worked out. So that was the care factor there. And also having the speakers, having a celebrity speaker that catches attention, that adds the care factor too. Okay, so every event's going to be slightly different. We've spoken with non-for-profit events, charity events kind of thing. The care factor is a little bit different because there's that emotional pull and why somebody wants to support that charity. That's the care factor there, not necessarily the sizzle, if that makes sense. I hope that answers the question. But yeah, that's how I started MFC the first time. It was like figuring out, how can I start with nothing and start pulling in strategic pieces to actually build something that has enough mass, that gravitational pull, that will then pull everything else into orbit. And it did. Like once I got that core nucleus, like people started talking and it started going. And then the last piece of the puzzle is the audience, but you need the core here before the audience comes in. So let me explain this a little bit more in detail. Okay, so the speakers, they want size. And quite honestly now, because we have the size that we do, we attract some really top tier talent. We haven't announced next year's speakers yet, but I'm pretty pumped up to announce that. And we're able to attract people like this because we have the audience size. It's like, hey, listen, like, we'll have 3,000, 3,500 people next year. Like, this is the audience size, and people get excited because there's not a whole lot of events that have that mass, right? So size definitely matters for speakers. If you're looking for top tier talent, you need the size. So when I started pitching, and this is true with real estate, and this is true with running events too. So a bigger deal will have more sizzle in real estate. You'll be able to bring more people on board. Same thing with an event. If I had called up Kevin O'Leary's people and said, hey, listen, I'm looking to run like a 200 person, 300 person event for real estate investors. It's going to be at this hotel. It's going to be great. It's a 2-day thing. There's no excitement there. It's going to fall flat. But my pitch was, hey, listen, we're going to run the top, the largest real estate investing conference. We're going to have 1,500 people. That was when I thought the lockdowns were going to end, like months and months and months before they actually did. But my initial pitch was, hey, like we want to have 1,500 people at this conference. It's going to be big. It's going to be, make a big splash, blah, blah. This is all the stuff we want to do. That had sizzle to it, and that attracts the speaker's eyeballs. But mainly they're looking for size, and they're looking for an audience that resonates with what they touch on and what they're passionate about, right? There's no point in having a guy who's big on crypto talk about M&A. Like there's no synergy there between the speaker and the audience. So like you want to make sure you're lining up the speaker with the audience. So good example, a lot of people last year or this past year with Alex Rodriguez, they were like, hey Seth, why do you have this baseball guy coming? Like he's just a pro athlete. They didn't realize that he, like with A-Rod Corp, they invest in a ton of real estate, right? So I always try and have, plus, A-Rod's able to talk about pitching, investing, passive million, all that stuff. So we want to have topics that align with the attendees over to the speakers, okay? So speakers really care about size. They care about their image. So image is really important. So that's why a lot of speakers, when I had Kevin O'Leary, they got interested in coming on stage with Kevin O'Leary because it elevates their image now. So when you're dealing with that, there is a bit of ego in there as well that you have to take into account. But yeah, image is huge. So those are a couple points with speakers. I could talk for days about this stuff. Okay, sponsors, they want a qualified audience. Right. And one of the ways to get a qualified audience is by actually charging. Right. So a lot of events where they go wrong is they'll run a small event and then they'll run a really low ticket event. So maybe they'll charge $25, maybe they'll charge $15, $19, like, $50 to show up, $97. Like $97 is like the go-to thing for events. What happens there is you don't have the revenue required to put on a quality event that will actually attract the top tier talent. Right. So, and then plus you don't have a qualified audience. So that's why when you go to large trade shows where it's like free entry, like a home show, the cost to actually sponsor is lower because you have a lower like qualified audience, because people get in for free, so anybody can show up. But once you start charging, the audience becomes a whole lot more qualified, because now they actually have to pay money to get in the room. So now you know that they're more serious, and that's more valuable to a sponsor. So the sponsor wants to connect to qualified prospects for their business. So having your audience data is really, really important. So one of the first things I did was I learned this from a guy named Chris Bayless, is you want to survey your audience. If it's your first time running an event, you want to survey people who are likely to attend your event and find out information that's relevant to potential sponsors. So their age, what are their interests, what products do they buy, how like just what cars do they drive, like do they have mortgages? Like you want to get a good picture of their of the demographic you're targeting, because then you can use this data set and then attract sponsors with it. And this is what you're taking to the sponsor and say, hey, listen, I have your exact target audience. You're looking for people who are this, this, and this. And our data shows that we are attracting people that show this and this and this. This is what sponsors want. I can run an entire workshop just on sponsorship for events. But this is exactly how you want to structure things and run it. So sponsors, they care about the qualified audience because they want to get a return on their sponsorship dollars. So if they're putting, let's say $10,000 into sponsor an event, they want to get at least $30,000 back, if not more, in terms of return. I just use that as an example. And to get that, they need to get in front of the right people. So this is why data is really, really important. Now, attendees, they want a number of things, right? So attendees, they're looking for the transformation. So they're looking for the speakers and the content who can take them from point A to point B. That's what they're looking for. Also, they're looking for connection. So with our conference, networking is a big thing. So we're always looking to set up networking lounges, make sure people have enough time to talk. That's one of our post-event survey questions we do all the time. It's like, hey, did we give you enough networking, not enough networking? Like, let us know your thoughts. But really, at the end of the day, speakers care about the attendees care about the transformation they're going to get. So they want to go from where they are today to where they want to be tomorrow. That's why they're showing up in a nutshell. And to do that, you have sponsors that can help them out. You have the speakers that can help them out. But to get the attendee in the room, to have them pay to become a qualified person that the sponsor actually wants to tap into, you have to have the care factor, you have to have the sizzle and all that kind of stuff. So that's a bit about the event triad. I'm happy to go into specifics if you have specific questions about the speakers, sponsors, attendees, but this is really how you build out events, okay? So let me erase this off the board. So I will go into a big mistake I made when I launched my podcast and when I started doing thought leadership. And I feel really silly about it, talking about it right now, but it was a big mistake. So if you have a YouTube channel, if you do videos, if you have a podcast, whatever it is, you need to build, Dakota, can you dive deeper into how to acquire data from potential attendees? Okay, cool. Okay, I'll do that and I'll dive into my mistake. So the best thing to do if you're starting out with no audience, so now obviously we have a huge mailing list and we have past attendees and we do surveys and stuff like that. But when we were starting out, what I did was I set up a landing page and said, hey, listen, we're running this conference. I entered to win a draw for 2 free VIP tickets to this conference if you fill out the survey. And then everybody who bought a ticket, I sent them the survey. So we were basically building our data set as we went, and we kept updating our sponsorship deck with that as we went. So it's really simple. We still use Google Forms, like it's free. And we have, I think, 10 or 11 questions. The key with surveys is you don't want it too short because you don't get enough data and it's not useful, but you don't want it too long because people see it and then they don't do it. So anywhere between 10 to 15 questions is generally pretty good. If you want to offer an incentive, you can. But what I've learned the hard way is it's really important to have the incentive align with the type of person you want to sign up. So if you give away a free iPad, you're going to have a whole bunch of people sign up who just want a chance of winning a free iPad or a gift card. But if, let's say, for real estate specific, if you give a free membership to Yardi Matrix or CoStar for data, that's going to attract the people who you're looking for anyway, who could turn into potential attendees. So yeah, like for me, it was just, hey, I'll give you 2 free VIP tickets to this conference. I'll enter you into a draw for this if you fill out the survey, and that built out our first run of data for our sponsorship deck. And we covered age, demographics, what type of real estate were they investing in. We asked them how likely they were to apply for a new mortgage, what type of property management they were doing, where they were investing, which country, where they lived, just to get an idea, because a sponsor really wants to know, who are these people, like what are their challenges, can I tap into this, that kind of stuff. So I hope that answers the question. But now, like, it's just post event surveys. We'll run like contests and stuff throughout the year for specific groups in the list, but that's basically it. Okay. And then how much did I pay Kevin? Well, Kevin, yeah. So Jimmy, to answer your question with that, I got a COVID discount because nobody thought events were going to happen. So our cost basically tripled for 2023 because we got COVID discounts our first year. So, it is what it is. And then we had the whole inflation gate. Okay, cool. So big mistake and big lesson learned from running thought leadership platforms. I didn't build a list. So you need to have a list of people that you're building. So what I did for the first couple of years, I was pumping out podcast episodes the first year every single day. It was insane. I would do the podcast episode, thank people for showing up, end the episode. Great. I would upload it. People would download it. It was awesome. But I had no idea who these people were. I had no way to contact them. Like, if I lost my podcast platform, I would have nothing, right? So you have to start building a list from day one. I have no idea what I was thinking, but I was fresh. I didn't know better. So what you need to do is you need to create some sort of lead magnet or item of value or some sort of incentive to have people join your list, to give you their email address, their phone number, whatever it is. So on a podcast, what you would generally do is you would do your introduction, your hook, the reason why, offer a quick 15-second item of value. Hey, I've got this free book if you're interested in doing this. Hey, I've got this free video series if you're interested in doing this, whatever it is. And start collecting contact information. So now you can actually reach out when you have a new episode. Just mail your list, and now you'll increase your downloads. Like with YouTube, like it's like mail your list, like tell them you have a new video. Then you're going to get more subscribers, and that's going to help, and more people will watch it. That's going to help your watch time, all that kind of stuff, right? So you need a lead magnet to start building the list, because I wasted like 2.5 years, I think it was, just doing things. Like the podcast was great. I had listeners, but nobody knew how to contact me because I would never tell them. So there were probably people out there who wanted to invest in the stuff I was doing and do all sorts of stuff, but I failed to give them the mechanism to do so. So by offering some sort of lead magnet, or be like, hey, join my newsletter. Like I send out free tips every single week. People will sign up. Now you can give them offers. Now they know how to contact you. I never had anything in any episode or even on the podcast website. It was non-existent. So that was a huge mistake I made. Val, so all attended for this workshop get free VIP. No, Val. No, that was the contest offer we had for the first year. So the VIP tickets, those are very limited. So we can't give out freebies for VIP because we sell out every year, and they're very, very limited in terms of numbers. So in terms of the lead magnet, just some things I've tried in the past. I'll walk you through what's worked really well and what hasn't worked well for me. Oh yeah, Val, just joking. Okay, cool. Yeah, just want to make sure. All right, so so checklist for me, very low quality, right? So a checklist, we tried that. It was like, hey, like 25 things to make sure you do before investing in a real estate deal. That was low quality. It didn't really work. It didn't get too many bites. We had some training that we had training resources that actually worked really well. One of our top ones was a blueprint. So it was like a PDF download. It was actually a journey, a PDF blueprint of the SPY formula, which is one of the frameworks I teach for real estate investing. That worked really well for the PDF. And then you can have like courses if you want. But like the courses were really well received. The PDF worked really well. The training worked really well. Ebook actually worked well too, depending on the subject. We tried a couple different titles for it. Ebook was okay, but the checklist it crashed and burned, so it did not go very well. So if you're starting your thought leadership platform, whether it's podcast, YouTube channel, TV show, even an event like a conference or a summit, something like that, virtual event, have a lead magnet, have a way of collecting data or contact information. So now you can play offense with people rather than playing defensive and being passive and waiting for people to come to you. And I have no idea what I was thinking, but I wasted about 2.5 years doing that. So don't make that mistake. Cool. So we have covered podcast, some videos, TV, and the conference. I'm happy to go into more detail if you have very specific questions that you want me to cover. I'll stick around for some Q&A. Yeah, I hope this was insightful. It's the first time we've done a live stream like this covering this type of topic. So very interested to hear what people think. And of course, we'll be studying analytics and data on this after. So let's open up the floor to some questions if we have questions. And I'll be happy to answer them. So, yeah. So how do I actually pick speakers? That is a good question. So basically for the conference is I choose people I want to hang out with. That's basically it. So it's I think it's important to listen to the audience. Like this past year, Grant Cardone was highly requested. Obviously, that's somebody who I'd want to hang out with too. So it worked. Next year we have people coming who I wanted to hang out with. so we got them. That's kind of the way I roll it with that way. And that's a lesson I really learned from the podcast. Like I mentioned, at the end of the podcast, I had people coming on board for me to interview, and there was no interest from my part. There was no sizzle. Like it wasn't somebody I really, really wanted to speak with. And it fell flat, and I didn't really feel good doing it. So now everything I'm doing in terms of like the conference and events we're running, if somebody shows up and like I want to hang out with them, I still have the final say in terms of our speaker roster and all that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that it's somebody that fits. And with everything, right? Like your personality is going to shine through. The bigness of our event, like the tone of it. That's a lot of my personality, and I think that's an important intangible factor, and that goes into building out your blue ocean because nobody can specifically replicate you. So if you're doing videos and you're interviewing somebody, if you're doing a podcast and you have a guest, make sure it's somebody you're passionate about, that you really want to get to meet and talk to, because that's going to shine through everything, and your personality is going to be that X factor to avoid the market pulling you down and commoditizing you. Okay, that's a good question. Podcast, microphones. Oh, okay, cool. So with the podcast, I had it's upstairs actually. So with the podcast, I just had it was a Yeti Nano microphone, and it just sat on the desk, and you get one of those like foam covers on top of it, and it plugs into the laptop. The laptop mics itself work okay, but when you start elevating and you want better audio quality, you want to get a good microphone. I think it was like $300-$400, something like that. Maybe I'm overestimating. It wasn't very expensive for what it did, because I used it literally every day. That worked really well. So it was the Yeti Nano. I'm pretty sure it was the Yeti Nano. Yeah. Anyways, good microphone, It's like we don't really do the podcasting anymore, but it's there. We use it sometimes for voiceovers and stuff like that. So it was great. It worked really well. It was plug and play. And for me, like I'm not a huge tech guy, so I don't know how to mix soundboards and stuff like that. So it was pretty easy. And then we shipped off the audio file to somebody who would clean it up. At that point, that was down the road. At the start, I was like doing all the edits and stuff like that, and it was kind of tough. So that was a good one. Let's see here. And then, oh yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, in terms of like figuring out with your YouTube channel, like topics and stuff like that, I would go back. So with your vision for the YouTube channel, like you want to align. So yesterday we really worked on figuring out where we want to take our thought leadership platform, the impact we want to make, how we want to help people. I would figure that out. So for myself, I started the YouTube channel. It was focused on multifamily real estate investing. That's been our niche for a long time, and it's good. Like we've grown a decent amount. Like in terms of the grand scheme of things, we're still small. Like we're almost at, I think we're at almost at 6,000 or 7,000. Like we're very tiny now. But to expand and get us from our small niche here to the larger niche here of real estate and really branch out a little bit more, we're adding some more pillars to that content, and then we're upping our content production level. So you're going to be seeing that over the next couple months. But for you starting out, like I would say, just have a strong vision and just choose your content pillars around that vision first. See how it lands. Pump the content out, and after your first year of doing it, you'll be way better than you were, and then you can start analyzing numbers. But like for your first couple months, like who cares? Just produce the videos. You're going to get a couple views. It's just practice. Like you're riding your bike with training wheels at that point, and then you can start worrying about analytics. So now, like I said, like we're bringing on a full-time staff member whose only job it is to up our content game. So we're able to do a lot cooler stuff now. Or we will be. We're in the process of doing that, just because we have a dedicated staff person. Okay, I hope that answers that. Cool. Any other questions we have? I don't think so. I think we covered everything. Cool. Awesome. Oh yeah, AJ. Are there any ways you'd recommend to monetize the podcast other than just sponsors? Yes. Okay. Good question. Okay, this might be a bit of a long answer. Okay, there's a couple different ways you can monetize. Okay, so let's break through. So yeah, you mentioned sponsors. I'll cover sponsors, even though that wasn't specifically what you were asking, because somebody else might be worrying about this. So yeah, once you build up your podcast audience, and we have people offering to sponsor our YouTube channel. We have people offering to who offered to sponsor the podcast in the past. Some may have been fits. Like we don't really do that, but we certainly had pitches to do that. Once you build up a decent sized audience, people will sponsor because they want to get their message, their lead magnet, their item of value in front of your audience. So a sponsorship, you see this all the time now on YouTube. Hey, this video is sponsored by Wix. Like, build your website with Wix. Go to Wix.com, enter promo code X. Right, that's very common for sponsorship. I would say besides sponsorship, which depending on where you want to take your podcast, you may or may not want to do that. I would say collabs with your podcast. Now, let me explain what I mean by collabs. So let's say you don't have a product, or you do have a product. It doesn't really matter. You have an audience. Your audience, once you gather your demographic info of your audience, and there's so many different ways you can do this from your about your listeners on the podcast. They're going to have other interests. So let me take an investor right now, right? So let's say somebody's interested in investing. Let's say you're running a stock market podcast, right? You're talking about the stock market, current trends, predictions for the market, that kind of thing. There's going to be people in your audience who can be a good fit for another type of product. So you would then collaborate with somebody. Maybe you have somebody who wants to collab with you, who has a product to help business owners or people starting a business, an entrepreneur type of thing, starting a business or be a better manager. Maybe it's a course or something like that. That would really fit in with your audience, because your audience of stock market financial advice, there's probably a good chunk of business people in the audience. I'm just making this up off the top of my head. So instead of having a true sponsorship where it's like, hey, this podcast is sponsored by XYZ, what you'll do is you'll do a collaboration, probably bring this person on the podcast who has the course, have a full episode, bringing value, like talking about all the different stuff. And at the end or in the middle, you're going to make an offer for their course or their program here. And then you will have some sort of deal set up where maybe it's a 50-50 split on all the sales that come out of that program. That's a very common way to do it. And it's a very organic way to do it, because you're actually building out content that's valuable to the audience. Like, you're going to want to come up with a banger episode, but then you're going to make that offer for the course that will apply to a good portion of your audience, right? So this is a great way to monetize your podcast without doing outright sponsorship. And obviously, once you nail it, so let's say you grow to Joe Rogan size, that becomes a different ball game in terms of like selling the rights of the podcast and all that kind of stuff. But the collaboration, bringing people on, that's a great way to do it. Startup cost, a podcast, yeah. Honestly, the podcast cost is, you could launch a podcast for less than $20 a month, which is exactly what I did. So all you need is your computer, which you already have, right? Like, you've got a microphone in the computer. You can probably edit on whatever computer you have already with, a basic tool, some sort of free software. And you're going to usually pay to host your podcast somewhere, so the audio file. So we used a company called Libsyn. I'm not going to say good or bad things about it. That's just the only one we ever used. There's probably better ones out there, but I think it was like $9-10 a month until we had more episodes than we had to bump it up because we had so much volume. But for the small bit we had, it was really cheap. Like it's that's why I always suggest a podcast to get somebody started, because it's a great way to get into it. But then it's also great for everybody else because it doesn't cost very much, and other people will launch their own podcast. Lipton, no, it's Libsyn. So it's Libsyn, Libsyn. And I would do your research, because like we just chose this one. I never looked at other options because I didn't really care. I just like, okay, this is great. So what Libsyn does is, and speaking of monetization, I should have an affiliate link for this. But for Libsyn, you upload your podcast there. You put in your title, your thumbnail, all that kind of stuff, and then you set up the syndication with all the different platforms. So we had Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, all the different podcasts there. But it was called Libsyn. But yeah, podcast startup cost, very cheap. You can get way more expensive with it. You look at the top podcasts today, they have full-time staff, like the sound mixer there. They have the soundboards. They have the really fancy mics. Like you can really, you can even rent out studios to film your podcast in. But I like at the start, don't even worry about that. Like just get started with it. And then once you hit episode 200 and you've got, 5,000 downloads per episode, if you really crush it, then you can worry about that kind of stuff. Okay. Great question. Do you have video, audio for your podcast, or was it just audio? Yeah. So I started off with audio only because it was the easiest thing to do. So what we did was we had Zoom. Yeah, we started with Zoom. Yeah. So I would set up the Zoom meeting, send them the Zoom link. Some people back then were still using Skype. I don't know if people use Skype anymore. Probably not. But some people preferred Skype. But we would do the Zoom. I would record that. Then we would take the audio file from Zoom because it would split it up into audio and video. And then we would just upload the audio. I would just cut the front and the back and then just upload it. As we went on, the editing got more intense, I guess you could call it. And we were taking things out and moving things around. But at the start, it was just the start, the finish, boom, away you go. And it was pretty easy. And then we started uploading video to YouTube, And then we had the audio only on Libsyn, and that was syndicated out. But just keep it simple. Now, though, with Instagram and all that kind of stuff, you know, for what it's worth, like do the video and audio, and then you can do some clips and stuff like that. There's a ton of AI tools now who will clip things for you for like very low cost. So 100%. Good questions. Awesome. Video referrals. Did you have any success with video referrals in which media? Oh, okay. I get it. So kind of like testimonial videos, I think, Val. That's what you're asking with testimonial videos. Yeah, to be honest, that's something we've been slacking on with the testimonial videos. But for the podcast and stuff, like that's not like if you're doing thought leadership, yeah, it's great to have people talking about their experience with your program or your product, whatever it is. But that's not going to drive somebody to listen to the content, right? So you want to have your opinions, your frameworks, like your lessons. That's the content. The testimonial video is more like a marketing function. It's not really the content function. So could you have a YouTube video of you talking with a client, explaining all the different steps they took to get their result? Yeah. So I think, Val, you were talking about like the credit card debt, right? So you could have somebody do a video where they're walking people through the exact steps they took to become debt free. That's a testimonial, but it's more like an education testimonial. That works really well. But if it's just like, hey, like, you know, this is great, you know, this is my result, that's good from a marketing standpoint, but not really from like a content production. Oh, awesome testimony. Oh, that's great. Yeah, we'll we'll hit you up for sure, because we've definitely been slacking on that front for sure. I appreciate that. Cool. So yeah, I hope that helps, Val. But yeah, with your content stuff, with your thought leadership platform, remember, you want to focus on your opinions, your lessons that you've learned, and the frameworks you teach. So for debt reduction, you probably have like a 5-step debt reduction process, or like a 3 steps to becoming debt free, whatever that is. That would be a framework. Lessons you've learned, so stories. Hey, like, you know, I used to have this problem. You know, I went through these hurdles, and then this is why I learned from it. Lessons work really well. And then opinions. Hey, I think having more than 3 credit cards is insane because of this. Or, hey, I think you are insane if you don't have 3 credit cards, at least. Something like that. The reason we focus on this is because this is very unique to you. So opinions, it's your opinion. Like, nobody can really copy your opinion, or they can try. Lessons that you've learned, you're talking about your own life experience, right? So you can't really copy that. And then your frameworks, this is your IP, right? Your intellectual property. These are things you have developed and you have created. That's unique to you. And some people will try and rip off your frameworks, but generally speaking, like, this is unique to you. So if you stick with these 3 things for your thought leadership platform, like, the market cannot commoditize you because it's unique, right? Like this is you through and through. And within the lessons, like, you can add those educational types of testimonials where somebody's walking through the steps, that kind of thing. But yeah, this is really what you want to do. Okay, I hope that breaks that down, Val. Awesome. Okay, cool. I'll stick around for a couple more questions with this if somebody wants to go more in depth on anything. But this has been quite the 2 days in terms of breaking down our vision, the 3 Ds of thought leadership. And then today, I just wanted to share some personal tidbits and advice, and some things where things went wrong with what I did. Cool. Awesome. Well, no, this was great. Well, thank you, everybody, for participating. Keep me posted. We wrote a lot, but could we please get the recording? Yeah. So all this stuff is being recorded. We'll send out everybody who registered is going to be getting a link. We just have to figure out how we're going to get it out to everybody, because the files are pretty big. So we'll stay tuned for that. We have to figure out how we're going to do that. Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I hope this helped everybody. I'm very passionate about Thought Leadership Platform. It literally changed my life. You know, if I just thinking back, if I hadn't have launched that podcast where I was, none of what I'm doing now would have happened. So it has basically helped me do some pretty cool shit, and it's just getting started. So I want the same thing for you. So just don't wait, just start. I just started, and you figure it out as you go. Just start today. Start a Thought Leadership Platform, podcast, video, whatever it is, and just crush it, right? It's just consistent. So no, thanks very much. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. And yeah, just crush it. So talk about your opinions, talk about the lessons, talk about the frameworks, and follow the 3 Ds. Cool. Talk to you guys later. Have a good one.